Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the System 2 podcast. Today, I have the pleasure of having James on. James is the Senior Investment Advisor at General Catalyst. James, good to have you on.
Matei, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So, James, what's your story?
What's my story?
Take us back in time. What is your story?
Well, I'm a New Englander. I grew up in New England, Connecticut, and then Vermont. I consider myself a Vermonter. You know, my current career is in finance, but I remember in high school I was sitting with some friends, and people were all talking about, what do you want to do for your life? And I was like, I'll tell you what I know, what I don't want to do, and that's ever going into finance. And I graduated from Middlebury College in '94. And I still thought there's no way I want to be in finance. I didn't even know the difference between a stock and a bond. I was really interested in politics. And I had the good fortune of really my first job out of Middlebury was because I was the only person on U.S. Senator Jim Jeffords' reelection campaign, the only person from Vermont. I suddenly found myself, and the senator was stuck in Washington, D.C., working on legislation. I suddenly found myself speaking on behalf of a U.S. Senator, 23 years old, really having no clue. And I was running the rubber chicken circuit on behalf of Senator Jim Jeffords. He's a Republican who switched parties in 2000 and switched the balance of power in the U.S. Senate. So that was in 1994. I remember Jan Backus, the Democratic candidate, we'd be up on stage in these town halls and everything, and she'd say, I want the real Jim. But it was really an incredible experience. And to this day, really one of my favorite experiences I've had. I got to know a number of the other candidates running for statewide office in Vermont. Jim Jeffords won every county in that election, reelected to the U.S. Senate. That was in 1994 as a Republican from Vermont. And it was an amazing experience. And so again, I knew nothing about finance at this stage. And so I went down to Washington. I ended up meeting someone by the name of Ari Fleischer, who went on to be U.S. White House press secretary under Bush. But he was a Middlebury College grad just like me. And I was literally knocking on doors. And someone said, oh, have you met with Ari? I said, who's Ari? He happened to be the communications director of the House Ways and Means Committee. And again, this is 1995. Remember, Newt Gingrich and the Republicans took over the House for the first time in 40 years. So the Senate was Republican, Bill Clinton was president, and the U.S. House was Republican. And the Ways and Means Committee is responsible for 60% of the U.S. federal budget. It was a big job. Ari's like, hey, you can work for me. I was like, great. I can't wait. How much do I get paid? And he says, you don't get paid. You're doing it for free. So I was clearing tables at night trying to make ends meet, but I knew this was sort of the nexus of what was going on in Washington. And it was an incredible experience to be a fly on the wall. Ways and Means, that's Medicare, Social Security, trade, taxes, most importantly. And so there was a financial element. So I'd be sitting in the room when Congressman Bill Archer, Chairman Archer, was meeting with Treasury Secretary Bob Rubin, and they were negotiating. Ultimately, when we got the cap gains tax cut, they came to, had a compromise there. But that I began to dip my toe in the water on financial matters. And so all of a sudden I was getting sort of backdoor an interest in what was going on in sort of the financial world in the markets. Even though my first love was politics at the time, I started to say, hey, you know what? Finance is kind of interesting.
I love it. Nothing like not getting paid to make you want to go into finance. It's like, oh, I wonder if there's another part to life. When you knew you did not want to go into finance, was there any particular reason why? Like as a kid beforehand, before you had exposure to it, did you have any negative experiences with it?
What Winston Churchill said, if you're young and conservative, you have no heart. If you're old and liberal, you have no mind. I was young and I wanted it, maybe go into nonprofit, go into politics. I sort of wanted to change the world. And my father had a career in finance, and I just didn't want to do what my parents did. I really wanted to be different. It's maybe why I moved to the West Coast when I got older. I just wanted to have a different life experience. So I just knew I wanted to do something different when the boring finance people did. But, Suddenly, it's like you're worried. I eventually got started getting paid when I worked for on the Ways and Means Committee, and I got paid once a month. So I joked I'd be rich for a week and poor for three because I'd blow through my month's salary. I was getting $18,000 a year. Then suddenly you realize, hey, that last week I couldn't even buy French fries at the Capitol Hill cafeteria. You realize, well, you kind of have to make money to basically make ends meet. That's just the reality of life, as altruistic as one wants to be.
More about your parents because it does feel that way. Like my dad was a doctor, and growing up, that's the thing that I would say to, like, the only thing I knew was that I did not want to be a doctor. And in retrospect, I didn't really have much of a reason except that something about it didn't appeal to me. But in retrospect, like, I probably should have given it more of a chance. And it sounds like you've come full circle to the point where you are now working in finance. I'm curious about, like, you want to be different from your parents. Like, what was it that didn't appeal to you as a child about working in that industry? And because, yeah, you've since changed your mind.
Well, it's a little misplaced, and again, if you're in college and you have these grand ideals. When I worked for Jim Jeffords in Vermont, I knew everything we were doing because it was a campaign, it was a big deal, was going to be in the paper, right? I felt like everything I was doing was relevant to the day to day of most people. Similar ways and means, you're debating a tax bill. You knew what you were doing had significant impact. And that was really appealing. The idea of working at, when I was young, at a local bank, doing nothing that didn't really have a broad societal impact was not appealing to me. It just wasn't. But I remembered both Congressman Bill Archer and Jim Jeffords, may he rest in peace, died probably 10, 15 years ago now. Bill Archer's in his mid 90s, still alive. They both said to me, don't ever get involved in politics until you've made money yourself. And again, that lens at the time, I was like, wow, maybe I actually have to start making money if I want to go back to politics. That was my thinking at the time. And that was the first time where a little light bulb went off in my head and thought, actually, finance does matter. The markets do matter. The markets do drive everything. Arguably, they drive politics as well. Maybe there is relevance in finance that I wasn't giving it enough due for.
Side of it, how was it to be a young man being so close to all these famous politicians and being able to, yeah, control 60% of the US budget, like in your small way? But then what was that like to be so close to that center of power?
I loved it. And you realize they're just people. They're just people. I mean, I had so many opportunities just to stumble in and meet really well-known people. Like one time I saw Warren Buffett just sitting by himself in the waiting room in our office waiting to meet with Congressman Archer. You meet so many interesting people, and it's fascinating that the implications of their conversations are broad reaching. But at the end of the day, you just have this personal interaction going on. Bob Rubin and Bill Archer, they had a good relationship. President Clinton and Congressman Archer, and Archer was viewed as, at the time, sort of the ideal conservative. People would go up to him, new congressman, newly elected, remember 94, the conservative wave. They'd go up to him, shake his hand, and say, I just want to meet you in person. You have been my idol for my whole life. And he was just a down to earth, good man. And one time, President Clinton called him up and said, hey, come by this White House. Let's just hang out for the Sunday afternoon. No press. Nobody knew about it. And that was the foundation of trust. And Bob Rubin and Congressman Archer in that room, they were both smart. They were both business people. Archer ran a grain business in Houston, Texas beforehand. And there's a foundation of mutual respect and trust that was able to accomplish and get things done. And from a conservative point of view, accomplishment, cutting capital gains tax rates, you know, under a Democratic president. So I go back to they're just people, they're just relationships. I was a fly in the wall. I wasn't having any influence on any of this. I just sat there and listened. I remember one quick story. So when I was an unpaid intern working for R.A. Fleischer, My job for the day was Bob Schieffer, who's CBS Evening News main anchor at the time. I basically was escorting him around. I sat in the room. He was talking to Archer, interviewing him all day. That night, I'm literally clearing tables at this Mexican restaurant with people, and everybody's looking up on the TV with Bob Schieffer delivering the Sunday, the evening news. That was back in the day when the evening news was something. And I was the busboy thinking, I spent the day with this guy. Now, may I ask, are you done with your nacho and chips? It was great contrast, and I was just a sponge taking it all in.
How did that feel? Because there must be so, I don't know, like on one hand, inspirational, you're seeing all these people, but at the same time, like humbling. This is your reality was very different from the work reality. How did you deal with that incongruence?
I had to put in my dues. I was so lucky to have a job, and after 3 months, I started getting paid, because I was like, "I can't do this anymore." I was just so lucky to be in the center of a lot of activity going on where, at the time, the Republicans took, control for the first time in 40 years, and I happened to I worked for the most liberal Republican in the Senate, but he was a Republican and then ended up, you know, overworking for Congressman Archer. Just to be an observer at all, I felt fortunate every day. Every day I walked to the office, I saw, the Capitol. I was like, "Man, I'm lucky to be here."
It's such a refreshing perspective too. I feel nowadays a lot of people feel entitled to get the best job straight out of college, and forget that
I
sometimes.
wasn't qualified to, and some are, but I certainly wasn't qualified.
Did you yourself have political aspirations, or would you ever want to get back into politics?
I still have a real desire for public service, and so, probably not, but I've also learned I never rule anything out. When I ruled things out when I was in high school, I ended up going there. So, it would have to absolutely just feel like the right opportunity. I will say I have tremendous amount of respect for people who dedicate on both sides of the aisle, who dedicate their lives, who give up a lot of economics, a lot of it's a very, very difficult position to be in public service on either side. And I do believe there are people there who truly do it for the right reasons. And if the opportunity arose for me to serve in public service, not necessarily an elected position, and the timing is right, I absolutely would be open to it, but certainly not at this age or in the immediate future.
You mentioned, yeah, it's a difficult job, constantly getting blamed by all sorts of people for all sorts of things. What is it to you that is so appealing about public service?
Because I think there are a lot of good people who do public service. I truly do. But there are also people, and I believe it's the minority, but who are in it for the wrong reasons. And we need people who are going in it for the right reasons. And if people are going in it for the right reasons and they're there and they're serving, they're doing a good job, then we don't need to. I mean, I give the example. I remember when my son was on a soccer team years ago and he's in elementary school and practice wouldn't start on time. Things were disorganized. I was a parent. I was like, I can either complain or I can be the coach next year. And I know nothing about soccer. But I also I know what it's like to be, to lead kids and have a great experience. So I was like, I either gotta not complain or do something about it. And if people are stepping up and doing something about it, you know, there's no need. But if there's an absence of that, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to step up and do something about it.
It's very easy to start complaining and you think like you're making a difference by complaining to your friends and family.
Exactly.
And turns out that doesn't change anything.
Oh, it drives me crazy. And it's a lot to take on, but sometimes you're like, "Oh, all right, I gotta step up here."
Yeah. Okay. So what was next? What was next after working in politics?
You just have to I really, really try to look at everything in the long lens. So I did an amazing job. I ended up after my internship, ended up being press secretary for Congressman Bill Archer. I was pretty young. I think I was 25 at that time. And I thought to myself, where does this go? I did some um, volunteer evening cable shows, things like that. Um, and I thought, well, one could be a talking head, but where does that end up? That's a tough, tough long-term gig. It could potentially maybe the right Republican gets into the White House. I could work at the White House, but the odds of that were slim. Of course, Ari Fleischer then goes on to be White House press secretary. Um, And so I thought, you know what? I gotta spread out sort of my options. And this idea of potentially learning a major pocket of ignorance was the markets for me. I could go to business school. I could learn a lot about the markets. I'm filling this big pocket of ignorance. It helps my foundation. I've got the political, I had a little bit of the writing and and the public speaking. Now, if I could learn on the markets in economics and finance, like what is the negativity that an MBA would give me? I didn't see a lot. Every decision you make, is it going to open doors or close doors? I kind of look as a career as a triangle. You're starting your career at the bottom of your triangle, but as you go on, your options get more and more limited and you get more and more focused. And I thought, an MBA would actually help that foundation and give me more options, open more doors. And as you go on, like, I will never, ever, ever be on the Supreme Court, right? I'm not a legal person. I am not a lawyer. But when you're in college, you're like, oh, maybe I could. Maybe I go to law school, right? And so I saw the path to an MBA would open more doors for me and give me more opportunities. And I thought a career in politics ultimately would have been limiting. And maybe I would be too dependent on those sources of power for career paths, which ultimately maybe would lead to bad decision making based on influences. So I went and got my MBA, went to business school.
To the next phase of your career, say more about what it was like to be the press secretary and how you like what you learned from communicating with the media. And I'm also curious what that was like then in the late 90s versus how that's transformed today with influencers and podcasters and all these things. Well, yeah, we can start with what was your experience like back then?
It's hard for me to comment what it's like today. I can only say it's got to be harder, but I do think the crux of what it means to be a reasonable press secretary is the same as most things in life, and it's really driven by relationships. And I had a really good relationship, and I got to know the reporters that were responsible for covering Congressman Archer. Now, Fleischer dealt with the national press. My job was mostly just on the Texas, but there were sometimes verticals that were outside the ways and means responsibilities where the national press would approach me. And it was really, really relationship driven. I wasn't a great writer, but I did make an effort to get to know the reporters that covered Congressman Archer. And I think, there was one major paper that I remember calling me and saying, hey, this is our article. This is what we're going to say. Are you okay with that? And I thought, wow, they trust me enough that I'm not going to just give them. I mean, one time I heard someone say, this isn't spin, this is the truth. A press secretary said that, which was kind of funny. But they felt as though we had the relationship that I would deliver the truth and I wouldn't just give them spin. And Congressman Archer was nice. He's like, look, we've had great press. And I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing, but I do feel like I've got a good relationship with the reporters I'm responsible for. Now, in the end of social media and all that and quotes, and I don't know how that's different, but I think the crux and the foundation of it is still probably the same.
So, okay, after your MBA, you get a job at Goldman Sachs. Tell me more about that. I mean, Goldman is Goldman. Was it easy or hard to land that job? I mean, it's obviously a very different industry than what you're used to. How did you end up getting that job?
Well, originally I wanted to be a consultant and because I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I, studied for all the interviews, blah, blah, blah. I probably got 10 interviews. I had 0 callbacks. And then I walk over to, Goldman Sachs had their information day, and I walked in for a few minutes. I was like, okay. I walk out. I was like, that would be a really interesting place to work. I don't know what they do. They then had a little cocktail reception. I literally zip in, chat with one Goldman colleague or employee for 10 minutes. And I was like, okay, fine. And I leave. They didn't ask me to interview, but Goldman, to their credit, I don't know if they still have it to this day. You have an open sign up sheet. So there are like 50 people I was at Columbia, sign up. for their name, and I put my name down. So they have to interview me. The one person I knew at Goldman who I spoke for 5 minutes at that reception happened to be the person who interviewed me. And I was like, "Oh, wow. Hey, how are you? Nice to see you again." And we just chatted it and it went well. And Goldman, to their credit, kind of like someone with different backgrounds, right? They'll do a bunch of hires of the people that are the quants and all that. But they're like, "Oh, let's take a flyer on this person who has a totally different experience." So after I actually got a call back after that interview, and then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm panicked. I got to start doing some, figure things out, do some homework for my ahead of my second round." My brother ran into a friend of his. My brother happened to be in the city who happened to work on the Goldman trading floor that I knew when I was a camper and I was like 8 years old and I went by the name of Jamie. And this guy's like, "Oh, your brother should talk to me. I haven't seen him in a while. I'll tour him on the floor." This is between my first and second round. I was like, "Done, I'm going." So I go down to the trading floor and this guy introduces me, everyone on the trading floor, Jamie Wilcox. I hadn't gone by Jamie in like 25 years. So everyone's like, "Hey, Jamie." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I am not correcting this guy." So by the time I got to the second round, I could say I met this person on the floor, this different, and all of a sudden, and it was just for a summer job. They're like, "Yeah, let's give a flyer. He's done his homework. He knows a bunch of people at Goldman." And they gave me a summer offer. And basically, that was the only offer I got. So I took it.
It's, something very similar actually happened to me too, but I'm curious, like, what in that 5-minute conversation you had at that event, I mean, I know you're kind of dismissing it, but you clearly must have said something that resonated with your future interviewer. Do you have any advice for people that are listening to this or earlier in their careers and they're thinking about the importance of these serendipitous moments, but how you can make the best impression possible even when you only have 5 minutes with somebody?
Yeah, again, I remember I was at this I was talking with someone in this group section, and this person was talking to a bunch of scouts, Cub Scouts basically. And he said, "I thought when I was done with college, I was done learning. I didn't like being a student. But then I realized my learning had just begun when I graduated from college." And I think ultimately don't say what you think people want you to say, but have a true innate curiosity in what people do and be authentic about it and ask questions. And it helped. I really knew little about what Goldman did. And I must have demonstrated, I don't remember the conversation, but I must have demonstrated a true innate curiosity of what Goldman Sachs did. They were still private, they hadn't gone public yet. These were early days. And I think that just came across, right? And so I think, one really needs to have an innate curiosity and a desire for learning. I think is a critical element of success, however that's defined in.
You talked about trust in relationships, and then you mentioned getting in on the trading floor through a friend of your brother's. I'm curious, like, it sounds like that was obviously it was very serendipitous and it was like the one thing that one, but I'm wondering if that's how you think about that more broadly, right? Because it sounds like even from your political days that you've been thinking about building relationships with people. And then if it hadn't been that one person, could have been somebody else. And so it's not like it just had this only one shot at getting a.
Yeah, I mean, related to that a little bit, I think, and I hope I'm not taking it offline a bit, but I had a horrible job once. And one of my first was just like a couple months right out of college. And it was probably the best thing that ever happened to me is having a horrible job. Because I looked around everyone I was working with and who I was working for, especially the person I was working for. I was like, I never want to be that person. And therefore, I am not in the right place. It's a little analogous to when you're in college. I don't think necessarily the subject matters as much as how good the professor is. So I went in with my job at Goldman. I was like, I don't even know what these people do, but I am so impressed with everyone I'm meeting with. I want to learn because I want to be surrounded by great people who I want to be like and I want to learn from. And so if I was interviewing in other places, I would have just, kept knocking on doors. I was willing to work hard to try to get those introductions, but my measure wasn't what do these people do? It's more who are these people? Am I going to learn from them? And am I impressed by them? And do I one day want to be like,
That's yeah, that's so powerful. And what was Goldman like? This is what, like the late '90s when you started working there.
yeah,
What was
90,
that?
interviewed in 98. I joined 3 weeks after they went public.
Yeah,
So everyone was happy but me.
yeah, if only it could have been a few years earlier. What was that like? What was that atmosphere? I've always, I started working in 2007, and even by then, like Goldman was already very established, the top of the top, and to be there as they're going public, as they're about to transition from being like a cool but still like private bank to becoming the Goldman that we know today. And you were there for it. So what was it like?
I think my naivete really helped. I mean, candidly, from my time on Capitol Hill and the people I met, and I just was like, wow, this is so neat. A story like within my first month, John Whitehead, who ran Goldman in the 80s, was Deputy Secretary of State under Reagan. He was in charge of the 9/11 memorial built in New York City. Truly someone who succeeded in the private sector, the public sector, and the nonprofit sector. That is amazing. I was like, this guy's great. I'm just going to call him up and meet with him. I would never do that today. But at the time, I'm like, I want to meet with John Whitehead. So I call him up and he's like, yeah, come on by. We chatted for like half an hour. I'll never forget it. He was so humble, so smart. And, you were surrounded by people like he's obviously long retired from Goldman, but these partners who built it from the ground up when they were a private partnership. I was just there as a sponge, literally the low person in the organization to just soak it all in. And that had really been my experience since college is surround yourself by really powerful, interesting people, learn from them and recognize your place in the organization. So that was no different. And yeah, I loved it. It was great.
How do you on the point about recognizing your place as the most junior person in this organization, and then to get the courage to pick up the phone and call like the most senior person, and then go in and have a meeting with them? What was going through your mind? How did you like? Did you even find that to be courageous, or you're like, oh, this I guess is what we do here?
Yeah. I don't know because I wouldn't do that today. Um,
Why not? They see more about that. Why wouldn't you do that today?
well, because I know how busy people are and they don't have time for this. Um, but it's a reflection of the culture. Arguably it's a flat organization. Look, there's someone, it's not that everyone was that way. I just was fortunate in calling someone who was. But when you actually got the opportunity, so they had as part of the summer associate class, all these, what would they call it? Goldman, I forget the name, but really the people that built Goldman to what it was before they went public. They would come into our class and talk and say, hey, if you want to talk, you know, follow up, send me an email. That was sort of the culture. So I didn't know any better. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So they did a really good job in bestowing the culture and saying, hey, we're reachable, we're accessible. And as any organization, talent is the top thing. You got to don't take it for granted. And so we were sort of the MBAs spending the summer there. And like, it's summertime. We got to invest in as we grow in talent. And so there's a good mindset. Now it's like, I got a job to do. I got to do it. I can't be wasting time bothering people with menial requests. I got to produce deliverables.
This really is a very important part to growing organizations. And to your point about investing in the next generation of people and making them feel like they're welcome at the very least, like you're one of us and this is how you're, and it sounds like you had multiple mentors at Goldman. Talk more about just even learning the basics of the job. And I guess what group did you initially start off in, and how did you learn?
They had, one of the real advantages, I think, of starting in a big organization, one's career, there's a lot of structure around the training education. I think we had 3 months, maybe 4 months of training before we actually got onto the desk. So I was in sales and trading for European equities. The idea of going to Europe once a quarter, meeting with the research analysts, was I thought incredibly glamorous. Back then, it was, the European market was on fire. I think we had 45 IPOs our first year in 2000. That was the peak of the dot com, right? And Europe's valuations and the euro and the EU, that was all, it was the hot place to be. And so we got a lot of training. And then, um, yeah, that's where I wanted to be. I wanted to be on the sales and trading desk, and be in the markets, be in the middle of it. Like this was an extension of my education, and I thought it was really interesting. And I liked working market hours, to be honest. I didn't have to work weekends. And so, yeah, that's where I wanted to be. And in that summer, I again made an effort to get to know everybody on that European equities trading desk. The two people who ran it were just excellent leaders, great people. And I thought, okay, I just got to get to know everyone on this desk if I want to get the job. And halfway through the summer, I thought I was doing pretty well. And the head of the desk said, James, you used to be top of the heap. Now you're kind of drifting towards the bottom. You got to step it up. I was like, oh boy. So I decided I would learn each member of the desk had particular aspects that were important to them of the job. As an example, one person, I was not a stock picker. I didn't know how to pick stocks. He was a stock picker. So I was like, okay, I got to pick 3 European equity names. I got to give a pitch to him and then seek his feedback on my pitch. That was how I got to sort of get to him. But my view was I got to have everyone on this desk be convinced that they wanted me on that desk. They wouldn't mind me sitting around next to them for 12 hours a day. So I had to figure out who and each person, like what was the thing that mattered to them, and focus on that. So by the end of the summer, lo and behold, I got an offer from the desk.
That is such a great strategy in terms of like putting yourself in that seriously, but like it's easy to like when you say it, but it is so hard for us to put ourselves in other people's shoes and to think about like, no, what is it that you actually care about? And then just ask them, right? Or and oftentimes people will just tell you, they'll really tell you what they expect from you, and they make your job easier if only you just ask and listen and then try to give them what they want, but they already gave you half the way there. Did you like but I'm also curious about your reaction to receiving that bad news. If somebody that it sounds like you're a social person, you're talking to everybody, people liked you, and then halfway into the summer, they'd be like, "You're really like we thought you're great, but you're now proving to be average." And yet you take that and then you just go nuts with it. Like how were you upset or did you view it as a challenge? How do you remember receiving that news?
I didn't think it at the time, but in retrospect, I've had many painful lessons in my life and career. And my mantras now is the most painful lessons are the ones you learn the most from. So you're like, oh boy, this is painful. You pause and you're like, all right, what's the takeaway? Let me address it. Let me get better at it. And that was an example where I was like, wow, this is painful, but I gotta to improve here. He's provided it to me. And it doesn't mean you're not gonna have a couple days of like anxiety, but as time goes on and you're able to address where that source of pain was and how to correct it, then obviously getting an offer, and I got the offer from a payphone in a bus station in Western Massachusetts, which I'll never forget. But it's like, hey, that was pretty good. That felt pretty good.
Then what? So when you came back, were what's talk me through the rest of your time at Goldman.
Well, 2000 was probably the peak. And, we had a great desk, people we still stay in touch with. We suffered being in downtown Manhattan through 9/11. That was a very, very painful episode. But as a result, all 12 of us, I believe it was 12 on the desk, really bonded to this day. We'll always pick up the phone. We're there for each other.
Were you there on 9/11?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah,
So it
what
was
was that
tough.
like for you?
It was terrible. That's all I can say. It was terrible. Um, yeah, it was tough. It was a tough time for sure. And then, the markets collapsed thereafter. Ultimately, 3 and layoffs start rolling in, and suddenly it got to the point where I was like, I'm learning a lot, but what's my value add here? I'm not sure. I think the music stopped, and this actual job of calling up people who know a lot more investing than I do, telling them about research and what's going on in the markets. Like, I don't understand why I have a job currently. What is my value add leaving people voicemails every day? And so, the markets did recover in '06, '07, then we had that other bubble. But in '05, I was like, I'm learning a lot, but I'm adding no value to this organization. And I love being in New York. I love where I was, center of the action. But in the end, I zoomed out and I was like, I don't understand why this job's going to exist in 5 years. I don't know why. I just don't see what my value add is. At the end of the day, what am I creating? So I got out in '05, and I started doing personal investments for primarily my actual institutional clients for their personal money. And they give me their cell phone right away. I was like, wow, I've talked to you for 5 years. I've never had your cell phone. Now I do. This must be, this must be the right move. And I figured on the West Coast, especially Southern Cal, a lot of money, not a lot of finance, especially in, you know, mid 2000, early 2005. So that's when I sort of pivoted, figuring, where can I add value, et cetera. But I really had a great time in New York. My 7 years there were great. The people I worked with is great. I wish I could have stayed, but it's like this job isn't gone. And like that job went, I think at our peak, we had 4 offices, 35 people doing what I did. It went down to 3 in one office, I think 2015.
What was the main reason for the that decline in that particular business line? This is European sales and trading?
The markets didn't do great, and, the P&L didn't make sense. You're a relationship person for the buy side, so money managers, pension funds, hedge funds, but we weren't adding a lot of value. Some people were with good stock ideas. I certainly wasn't. And so you didn't need a lot of people doing that job, and the commission rates plummeted on the trades. Research was free. You pay for research. It's just structurally, the margins went down considerably. We didn't need all those people. But the advent of everything being online, trading commissions going down, active management being replaced by a lot of passive management, all those trends were not in our favor, and people got paid pretty well. So the P&L didn't make sense. There is a role, and it still exists, but you need a lot fewer people doing what we had a lot of people doing.
Was it how was it to transfer to a different division within Goldman and to move across the country? Or did you consider leaving Goldman, or was it what how did you end up in that new
I briefly looked around. I really didn't want to leave. And luckily, I had the support of people in New York for me to make this move. And I think, Goldman at the time wanted people to do on the, wealth management, private wealth side. And I remember the person I interviewed with in LA, who will remain nameless. He's like, I don't think I want to hire you, but everyone's telling me I have to hire you, so I'm going to hire you. So I was like, okay, thanks for that boost of confidence. Here we go, starting over again.
Yeah,
But I thought the learning curve was gonna be awesome, and it was.
there's something amazing about that, is just being able to get a job on the no, but seriously, right? I mean, that just goes to show how much trust and goodwill that you had word of mouth is and that personal recommendation from somebody else. And I love these kinds of like hacks where if you can figure out a way to get into whether it's a new client or somebody, even if the client does, like we have this sometimes where we work with some of our investors' portfolio companies, and the portfolio company at first doesn't want to hire us, but the investor is like, no, you have to hire them. And then they do, and then we, slowly try to warm their frozen hearts. But it's like it's such a sneaky thing that if you have people that trust you enough that they'll go to bat for you, and then other people that trust them and they listen to them to do something that they don't want to do. Yeah, but it's a great way to advance. So, did you end up warming this person's heart? Like, how was the rest of your relationship?
It was good. It was good. I ended up keeping that job and staying there for a long time, right? And there's a high burnout rate when you're starting from scratch and being told to build a book of business on the wealth management side. And I was fortunate enough to actually build a business, partner with some great people that made that possible. So, I ended up being a good hire.
Is it was it more awkward to go from, to your point, you know some of these people, but then when you're calling them up to ask to manage their personal money, and they're trusting you with their cell phones. It feels like a different kind of sales versus if you're just like representing Goldman, the institution, and you're whatever doing something in European markets versus this is much more personal. It's getting trusting you with their personal money. So how did you find that transition?
It's really hard, actually. It's a really, really hard business. And I think it comes down to it's a totally different skill set getting a meeting with someone and the persistence to get in front of them versus when you get that meeting, being able to tell them why you think their use of time is good. So to have the humility to be picking up the phone, trying to get in front of these CEOs is just absolutely brutal. But then you have the confidence when you actually get that time in front of them to deliver tangible advice. Don't waste their time. I think is actually a different skill set. Some people have both and they end up doing very well. Or in my case, I believe you know, I was fortunate to partner someone who I think is one of the best in the business in getting those meetings. And then I was able to be in those meetings and do a reasonable job once we had them. That was actually a key to the success when you have a team that actually play to your strengths and build that out. Um, that makes it hard. I mean, I love chatting with people and trying to give them advice, and I'm not afraid to do it. But the humility of trying to get in front of people is just a painful, painful process, I think.
Yeah,
But
like
some people love it and they do a great job.
it's extremely applicable to a lot of people that I speak with as well, especially as entrepreneurs when you're starting a business and you have to do sales. Like I think of myself as a pretty friendly person. I'm definitely extroverted. I like talking to people. And so you can easily get misled into be like, oh yeah, I can also just cold call somebody. But to your point, it is very different when you're getting those kinds of rejections and you're putting your own like reputation and your own soul on the line. And to get, because it's a numbers game, you're gonna get rejected way more than you're gonna hear a yes. How do you what advice do you have for people that are thinking about this or they feel like, yeah, like I'm extroverted, I can do it versus the reality of like going in and pounding the pavement and doing all these cold calls?
I mean, it's a little bit like, Roger Federer when he spoke to Dartmouth class, I think it was last year or the prior year. Statistically, I think he only won 51% of the tennis points he ever played, roughly. It's low, low 50s. Yet he's one of the greatest of all time, tons of championships. And that's Roger Federer playing tennis. Like in one's career, you're going to fail, I bet, 80% of the time. I really believe that. Those calls, the pitches, getting in front of people, you're going to fail 80% of the time. But if you succeed well in that 20% or even 10, that's incredible. I mean, I did the stats around cold calling. I think in the end, it was something like, again, my memory might be shaky, but it's about 1% of the calls you made, the people will end up being clients. But that could be enough. But man, that 99% could wear you down.
I once met a guy who was came into our office. He was selling software, and somehow we went down all these rabbit holes. And he started talking about he's Mormon, and when he went on his mission, and he was trying to convert all these people, and he did it for 2 years and met like thousands of people. And I asked him, I was like, "Oh, how many did you convert?" And he's like, "3." And not only is that like whatever 3 out of like 2,000, but the rejections are really terrible. Like people pulling their guns. I asked them about this. Like, what? See, people like chasing him away with guns. Surprisingly to me, those weren't the worst rejections. I asked him, like, what were the worst rejections? And he's like, oh, the worst rejections were when you talk to somebody and you have a great conversation with them on the park bench, and you're building up this trust, and they're a great person, and then they give you their address to go follow up the next day, and then when you show up at their house, you knock on the door, and it's a different house because they just pranked you and like gave you the wrong address. And he's like, that's the stuff that really fucking hurts. Where it's like, a gun in my face, whatever, I'll run away, that's fine. But someone that I thought I had, you had a great conversation with, you show up and the person was just like messing with you the whole time. Those were the things that get to you. And it's a really interesting, yeah, that was a more extreme example. And then when he was talking about software, he's like, yeah, like my trial, I go from trial to purchases, the conversion rate was like 20, 30%. Like, this is phenomenal. Like, I don't, yeah, like nobody's like messing with my emotions or pulling a gun on me. I can very easily sell software. So yeah, it's an interesting. I don't know. I also think it's an interesting skill to develop, especially as a young person when you're getting presented with that failure. And like these religions, I mean, there's a reason why religions exist for thousands of years, and they figured out a bunch of things about human nature that is critical to making us succeed in something. But it was such an extreme example of what how much it hurts to be rejected so much.
That's so true. I hadn't actually thought about it. The rejections that still pain me, the ones where I have really good relationships with, I thought, and they're no longer clients. You're like, what happened? You know, it's those stick with me because I'm like, I am giving you my best advice and I believe it is the best advice. And I always have your interests at heart. Always. Doesn't mean I'm always right, but you can trust me. And that is the hardest thing to find, I think, in our business motivation. And when those people walk away, and it doesn't happen a lot, but when it does, you're like, why? But you also know there's just things you don't know.
Yeah, do you have a sense of why that happens? They give you a reason in those moments?
There are things going on in your life you just don't know. That's the core of what it is. I really don't believe it has anything to do with what I am doing. There's things that are going on in their lives that require a change.
Started my company. So I used to work at a hedge fund, and all my friends from college and otherwise were in the investment industry. And we basically sell like data science services to these investors. So I was sure I can count on a bunch of my friends to get me my first couple of clients. And like that's how the business was going to start and everything was going to be great. The the reality was that nobody, like not they didn't even in for a meeting with their firms. And it's one of those things where like whatever. There's all sorts of reasons. Like I'm not upset about it anymore, but it definitely at the time I was like, holy shit! I thought I can count on like certain people, and then you realize like no, it's like these are the things that I'm just gonna have to like if I want this thing to succeed, I gotta can't rely on anybody's help. I gotta go figure this out and build it and build those relationships from scratch. And our first clients were strangers, and they've been great. They've now become friends. Our oldest clients. But it was, yeah, it was surprising how it's not what you expect it to be, and yet you have to figure out a way to just keep going and move on to the next thing and try to learn some lessons. And
Yeah, you can't mix church and state. People know what I do. They're friends. I just can't go there. If they come up to me, great. And it's happened. But I really it's got to be the reverse where it's clients become friends, but friends don't become clients.
keep taking us along the journeys. After Goldman, yeah, you're now a general catalyst. Like, how did you end up there? What were the next steps in that journey?
Well, again, I always try to pan back a little bit. And I had certain views on the trends within the wealth management industry and where we were going, similar to how I had this view on sales and trading, the institutional world was changing. I really believe the wealth management world was changing. And it was very, very important to have an open architecture and a fiduciary standard. When the Volcker rule passed in 2008, which basically said, Goldman couldn't be a third of its own funds it was marketing to clients. It had to be like 2 or 3%. It's like, wow, things have changed. This is going to totally change what we have to offer. So I thought it made sense to be in an organization where that reflected the trends, i.e., more independent and a fiduciary standard, not selling our own products and strategies. And I was a First Republic on the banking side for a long time, and they really were the best of both worlds. I thought independent advisory fiduciary model with a growing platform. I joined; it was at 60 billion. We peaked at 300 billion. Unfortunately, unrelated to what was going on in the wealth management business. First Republic I was part of the Silicon Valley bank run and basically went under. It didn't impact a penny of my clients' investments. In fact, they did really well at the time. But First Republic kind of went under. I was bought out by JP Morgan. And I was like, you know, I was with Goldman in the financial crisis when Lloyd Blankfein had to testify in front of Congress. I was at First Republic when our CEO there testified in front of Congress. Like, I'm not sure I like being tied to a bank that's publicly traded and watching my CEO. It has nothing to do with what I'm doing, having to sort of be in that situation, whether it's any fault of their own or not. I'm not saying it is. So I had gone from a platform, big, great Goldman to independent. So when JP Morgan acquired us, I knew I wanted to keep that migration. And I fundamentally believe there's a lot of structural challenges within the wealth management business as a whole. Simply put, people get paid for complexity. So the more complex, the less transparent, the higher the margins generally. And it's about scale. And so you got to make sure your platform goes to sort of the lowest common denominator. You can't, and it's correct, you can't be pitching crazy high risk products to someone who's $1 million and a retiree. And so you got to be very careful. There's a risk aversion, but if you get scale, you're going to have to kind of bring over all those types of clients. So I knew I wanted to be in an organization that was looking things differently, that was going to maybe reshape the future a little bit on the wealth management and away from the structural challenges that I believed that I wanted to be a part of. It's not to say you absolutely need that part in the wealth management. I just was motivated for being part of an organization that was thinking a little differently on how we do wealth management. And so General Catalyst, again, reminds me when I first started talking with the team, reminded me of pre-IPO Goldman, the partnership, the private, small organization, really, really impressive, top caliber people. And I thought, wow, this sounds really exciting and interesting, and I'm excited to join them and work with them.
General Catalyst, I mean, they're a very impressive firm, and your division, from what I understand, is a newer addition to that firm. But tell us the story of General Catalyst, and then we can dive into how you guys are compatible with what you're looking to do as you scale.
Yeah, so I mean, General Catalyst is one of the largest venture capital firms in the world. We have 40 billion in assets under management. That's a lot for venture. We've been around 25 years. We're a private organization, and we from day one have been focused on founders, working with founders, and investing. And that's what we've done. Investing in founders and people and building attractive returns for our LPs that are invested in our funds. So it's a venture capital company. That's how it started. It's really expanded now and into other areas of what we say La Familia. How do we help founders is kind of the crux of the question. So part of it is we maybe offer growth capital on a debt side that's different than that what else is out there that can help founders grow their business and sales and marketing without being diluted on the equity side. As I was talking about the complexity, it's so important for founders in their arc in terms of their wealth growth that at each stage of that arc, they're having a conversation with someone on their personal balance sheet. Do they have the right structure that's as tax efficient and importantly, as simple as possible? Because if someone is so fortunate to have a big wealth event as a founder, they're basically in two situations. They've either done too much or too little. And either's a real problem. And there's no incentive to really talk to someone at day one on their balance sheet because there's nothing to sell. There's no money to be made. But if we can help those founders and provide them advice on the infrastructure, that's building that relationship. And that relationship is so important to build and maintain because if they're successful on their first company, they're probably going to be successful in maybe their third or fourth, may have a failure in between, but they're the right people that we want to be involved with. So this idea of sort of being a personal advisor to these founders and helping make sure they have the right structure, et cetera, uh, just made a lot of intuitive sense for General Catalyst to kind of building that out. Uh, so, uh, you know, that those are sort of where we as a firm, we've also recently bought a healthcare network in Akron, Ohio, Summa Health. And so there we're actually trying to produce a good outcomes for patients but also with technology and a lot of the AI and delivering better outcomes on healthcare, sort of the vertical integration of some of the healthcare companies that we've invested in that are producing positive outcomes for patients and being more cost effective, as well as, so having that vertical integration of actually owning a hospital network. I didn't know this, but roughly half of states' expenses on our healthcare Medicaid. So if we can help them save money, great. And so that's an important aspect. So we're really trying to transform a lot of aspects of our society, but at the same time delivering returns for our limited partners. And the GC Wealth, which started 2 years ago, is just an element of that, of deepening those relationships of founders wherever they may be in their sort of arc of their lives.
It's so cool to see the benefits of scale, right? To be one of the largest venture capital investment firms, to then be able to, we do a bunch of healthcare investing. Why don't we own a hospital so that we can test out some of these products that our entrepreneurs are coming up with and deploy them and then scale from there? I mean, it's just, yeah, it's such an interesting way to like flex your muscles as you become big that makes it much harder for else that is doesn't have those resources to be able to compete to get on the cap tables with some of these cool companies. And on your side of it too, I mean, it's I would imagine that you obviously have generational wealth, and but those are pretty static. You know who the families are, you can try to go after them, but it's trying to fight for a limited market versus with entrepreneurs, that is, I imagine the bulk of like the growth in new whatever, like millionaires or billionaires are going to be from some of these like founders. And you guys have a factory that produces them, so why not try to also provide them with these additional services? So it's in some ways engineering it so that you're like the benefits of one part of the company can flywheel into the next. So it's
Exactly.
yeah, it sounds like a pretty clever thing to do.
Yeah, and it's fun. I've always almost all my clients have always been founders. They're such an interesting group. I mean, I think in my experience, the commonality of all founders is energy, charisma, and competitiveness. Those are, I think, generally the three common denominators. And seeing it that work, and it's just a really interesting, fascinating group of people to have the pleasure of working with. Yeah, it's fun. It's amazing and gutsy, man.
Say more about those three characteristics? Like, what you've obviously, I'm sure you've seen very competitive people at Gold. Maybe this mix of three different things that makes them a little bit different.
You got to be willing to take risk and have a vision. And you really need to be able to share that vision with people and have them follow you, right? And that's the charisma. That leadership, that charisma is so important. But it's a risk tolerance too. And like, hey, I am committed to this. It may not work out, but this is what I've got to do. And it just requires a lot of energy. And the competitiveness, I hadn't really thought of that until with a few of my founder clients I've ended up playing some sports with or wherever. I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so competitive. And then I realized that's the third thing, competitiveness. I always thought it was just energy and charisma. But yeah, it's a lot of work and a willingness to fail. And just having this vision and making sure everyone's on that journey with you.
Is that Does that make your job harder or easier when you're working with these entrepreneurs and they have this crazy risk tolerance? But does that mean they want to take crazy bets with you and their personal investing, or by that point they're like, I just want to diversify. I've had enough like headaches. What does that translate from your side of the equation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty boring, and my whole sort of stream of advice to founders is you're taking risk over here. People underestimate the importance of tax efficient, transparent liquidity on their balance sheets. And once you have that, once you've built that, and don't just sort of toss aside, oh, that's easy, everyone can do it. No, actually, it requires a little nuance and thoughtfulness. And there are really inefficient markets in that liquidity bucket where you can get tax adjusted, risk adjusted, attractive returns. Spend a little time on that. And then you can focus on all the sort of the risk high octane stuff because you've got your base here. And then you can feel a lot more comfortable on the other side. Now, there's some people who will never say, I don't want to do it. And the outcomes can be crazy good or really bad. And so, yeah, sometimes people say, oh, I'm not interested. But most of the time, people say, yeah, that makes sense. In particular, if you look at like the financial crisis, Warren Buffett, prime example, like if you had liquidity during the financial crisis and you were sitting there with liquidity, Can you imagine how much money you actually made? So when the tide goes out and you're the one holding liquidity, my goodness, that's your opportunity. For some founders, they're like, you know what? You're absolutely right. You need that liquidity for the once out of every 5 years or something that happens. I mean, I remember I had zero liquidity and I just didn't have a lot of money in '07, '08. This house across the street from me was gorgeous. They had to dump it. I was like, "This is gonna be a double within 2 years." And they're just offering it to us, and I don't have the liquidity to buy it. It's never gone away. It's like, I gotta have liquidity as soon as I can. I'm putting some stuff away for those opportunities. So, it's either age or the recognition, like, I'm gonna be able to buy everything on sale if I have liquidity. Age also makes a difference. You hit a certain age, you're like, "Yeah, I need to squirrel this away."
And did you okay, so say more about all these, like, are these entrepreneurs that have had a liquidity event and they wanna keep that capital, like, liquid so they can do their next thing? Or is it just even folks who have not had a liquidity event and they're putting away some of the profits in order to have a rainy day fund or some dry powder positions? Or, what are some of the different profiles of people that you've seen?
It really depends on where they are on that founder's arc, right? So most of the time I'm meeting with someone, they've raised money from, General Catalyst. So their story's going pretty well. But some of them is, it's as early as seed. So it really depends where they are in their arc. But let's say they get a little bit of money through a secondary or something. There is an inclination to say, hey, I just got a couple $1 million. I gotta make money off this. And you're thinking, does that really matter? Or does this matter? No, this matters. Your bucket, your company. The first thing that really matters outs when you generate liquidity, which I fully subscribe to, is having a home, buying a home. And the tax code rewards a little bit of leverage on that. There are the incentives, like there's utility value. Have a little liquidity. Instead of renting, maybe you want to buy a home. That's a good source of your liquidity, but you gotta get some first. Like, don't sell, some illiquid investment in a secondary at a big haircut or borrow against that at a super high rate. Before you can buy a home, you need a little liquidity. Let's just start there. Ooh, all of a sudden you got a bigger check. You still own a huge amount in your balance sheet on the company. Then let's think about, okay, where do we want to go here? Where's the end game? But let's say you need a certain amount of liquidity to live your life, getting free, after tax cash flow very conservatively. If you get a certain number through that liquidity on cash flow, world falls apart. That's not really going to move much. You're set. Then you've got a real risk appetite, and that's where you can really build wealth. But if you're really worried about losing money on this part of the balance sheet because you have no safety on this, that actually in the long run, I think hurts your ability to create wealth because you probably sell at right the wrong time. Market's off. I got to sell versus market's off. Ooh, maybe I'll double down because I have all this liquidity.
Do you find it that is it easy to get to communicate this message, or does it require a certain art to it where you need to get them to a point to do what's ultimately in their best interest?
Yeah. So I guess if it doesn't resonate, I never see them again. But my view is I get paid for my advice. I'm going to give my advice, and most of the time, people appreciate it. Even if they don't agree, they appreciate it. There's a challenge when people, especially if someone's important, like we've seen it just all the time, people say what they think they want the person to hear rather than having the confidence and the conviction and telling them what you think is actually the right thing. So I'm just always going to give what I believe is the right thing, the right advice. And I can feel good about it because I believe it's the right thing. But it doesn't always work, obviously, but you just got to have conviction in what you're doing.
I really love that. We're in the process of applying to kindergartens in New York City, and it's a whole pain. And there's all these schools, and they're very expensive. Every school's like better than the next. On one hand, they all sound the same when you read their values and their styles, and then again, when you go in, you see all these differences. So it's hard to make these decisions. And then we were at last week. And one of the heads of the school, he brought up that point, like, there's so much choice. There's so many things happening in our world today. And then all these people saying like, "Oh, well, I don't know what the best way to educate our kids are," and there's this and that. And he's like, "We know the best way to educate your kids, and we're very confident in that tradition because we've been around for whatever hundreds of years." It was such a like a ballsy, confident statement. But you're like, all right, it really resonates. Instead of that's what you're ultimately going to them for. Like if I knew how to do this, I'd homeschool these kids, right? Like I'm going to them because they should know what they're doing. And instead of like letting me make all these choices, like, no, we know the way to educate your kids, and that's why you're coming to us. And there was something very appealing about that level of confidence. And yeah, and I know there's a little bit too much choice to have someone that comes to you and says, no, this is the way that
Yep. Yep. And it's the challenge is getting those opportunities for that school as an example to get those people in the room to tell that message. I actually, and what I do, that's a huge challenge too. Get that opportunity to get in front of these people, to be able to share what you view. That's easier than getting those people in a room. And I would argue, not that I know much about education, but getting those people in the room is really, really hard too, the right people. And then they're like, okay, now we can deliver our message.
interesting. Yeah, how do you guys think about marketing? And I also know there are some limitations, regulatory limitations around what you're allowed to do.
We're focused on founders and talking to founders. And I do think structurally, a lot of them are not getting the advice they need because there's no money to manage it right now. So you gotta play the long game. You gotta have patience. You have your North Star, which is the truth and what you believe in. And you're gonna be talking to a lot of people that may never be clients or may not be clients 5 years from now. But you just got to do it and get in front of those situations, and good things will happen. So we've got this amazing network, amazing, as you say, flywheel, a familia of founders we've had the good fortune of working with over many years, and getting that opportunity to sit down with them and say that we're going to give you advice. It's not tied to products, or this is how we believe you need to think about your personal balance sheet. So the opportunity's there, and I think structurally a lot of these founders aren't getting those phone calls. Now, if you sell your company for 100 million to Google, you're going to be overwhelmed. But by then, a lot of aspects, it's too late. You've either, as I said earlier, done too much or too little. It's overwhelming. It's in their interest to talk to people when people aren't calling them. So they've got the foundation set, and then they can focus on growing their company.
That's so fascinating. Imagine that being a founder before you've had a liquidity event, you're almost like imposter syndrome. Like, I don't deserve this conversation. Like, I don't have,
Totally.
like, on paper, things look great, but I'm wasting somebody else's time. And yeah, like you said, it's also, it feels very disingenuous the moment that you have some like success that makes the front page, then all of a sudden, like everyone comes out of the woodwork is struggling. And I actually had some of these questions. So it's a fine line to play. And I think it's also just a testament to like founders being more open to reaching out and knowing these kinds of resources exist, because it is like everyone knows how this works, and it's you have to wait for these liquidity events, and it's not always going to happen. But if you want to develop a lifelong relationship with somebody, ideally they were with you before everything turned great.
And it's so critical when you're starting your journey. If you go this direction a little bit, you're going to end up way over here. Whereas you make sure you're on the right path, you know, fast forward a few years down the road, you're on the right path. But that foundational, setup is so critical. And sometimes people are scrambling right before a potential transaction. And had they had sort of talked to someone, said, you know what, little time now is going to save me a lot of time in the future, makes a big difference.
In terms of
But you're right.
what are some examples of that? What do you need to think about, even though you're years away from some kind of
I think just some of the basics, making, the trust structure, how you've set up. Don't go overboard on, giving potentially shares away before things are built. And again, I'm not a tax expert, but things like QSBS, qualified small business stock, have you set it up correctly? Is your company worth anything? Is it, 10 going to 15 million, or is it 10 times your cost basis? Do you have a cost basis? So suddenly if you do, maybe you could get a lot more than 15 million. Have you set up a structure that has all these things tied to it? So you actually, when you want to buy that first house, you can't because it's in some crazy corporation in Nevada. So you really just think like, how is this set up? And if I fast forward 5 years from now, is this where I wanna be? And really seeing the roadmap when you start the journey, rather than starting the journey and not really having the map out in front of you yet, and spend the time to look at the map before you start going.
Reflecting on your career, your life, even just in the context of this conversation, you mentioned that when you were in high school, you didn't know what you wanted to do for your life. How do you feel now? Like, what do you want to do with the life that you have left? How do you want to spend your time? What are some of the things you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm shaking my head because it's just there's so much one wants to do. I really believe that. I really continue wanna make an impact, make a difference, develop relationships, learn from the people I work with, and from that, you go in potential career paths that you never expected. I mean, I feel so fortunate to I never had experience in venture, never, right? And here I am at an amazing venture transformational investment company that started in venture. Wow, this is great. I want to continue to learn. I really, whether it's on the sort of community level, feeling like you're making an impact with your time and, as they say, time and treasure and your resources, and continuing learning and developing those relationships. So right now, I'm learning a ton. I'm in a new area. I want to keep that balance. I mean, if I'm 90 years old and I look back, ideally, when I was in high school, or maybe college, a little later than that, I was like, yeah, like John Wayne, he's successful in the nonprofit, the government, and the private sector. That's incredible to be able to do that. If you have the opportunity, the time, and the ability to do that. Right now, I'm obviously just focused on this, and we got a long way to go. And I love it. So I may be 80 years old and only investing and working with founders. I don't know. But I wanna keep making sure that in some small way, I'm having an impact and learning and building relationships along the way.
Yeah, there's just so many. That is the cool thing about not just life, but especially in a country like ours where you have so many different directions you can go in and you're meeting all these cool people. Like, what if I had gone down this other path? In some ways, I want 10 more lives just so I can keep exploring these like random side interests that I have. And yeah, at the same time, trying to do right by the ones that are in front of me and being able to focus on delivering that to them. So yeah, it's fun. It's also fun to reflect back on how far it is that we've come from to get to today.
So much more to do, that's the problem. I feel like there's so much more to do.
Yeah, and if there is one message I feel like for people that are younger, like it's so much. Like there's no excuse to not go into any of these things and like just start doing something. Even if it doesn't work out, who cares? It's so fun to try and move on to something else. There's no shortage of things that you could be doing with your life.
I know I'm quoting Oprah Winfrey here, but she said the most regret people have in life is not showing enough courage and not showing enough kindness. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's something I bear in mind, and it's simple. Courage is tough, man. That's tough. Kindness is a day-to-day discipline.
Yeah, words of wisdom from dear Oprah. Those are simpler times. I was actually thinking about this. You had Oprah on TV, like everyone knew who it was. You had these influencers that were so well known. Now it's hard to keep track of who the influencer of the week is and what message you should be listening to. Yeah, there's something about those times that was a lot simpler.
Yep, totally.
Well, James, it's been a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for talking to me today.
Matei, thank you for listening to me. I appreciate it. Love the conversation. It was really enjoyable. You're kind to have me on. Appreciate it.